Hey guys, have you ever allowed perceived weaknesses in your life to keep you from fulfilling your dreams? Well, if that fits you, then today's podcast is made for you. How do I bring my faith to work? How do I tap into the power of God in my work-life call? Why am I going through this adversity? Is God mad at me? I'm Oz Hillman, and I've been helping leaders like you answer these questions and more for over 30 years. That's what this podcast is all about. Let's learn and grow together. Welcome to TGIF, Today God is First. Hey guys, good to be with you today. This past weekend was the Super Bowl. And I was thinking about that game between the Chiefs and the 49ers. And with 6 minutes to play in the game, the Chiefs were down by, I think, 2 touchdowns. And I began to think, they got a tough road to overcome that. Well, they not only did they overcome quite well, and they ended up winning the game. But I saw such an analogy of how life can be. We can be down, but it doesn't mean we have to be out. And so today, I want to spend my time talking to you about perceived weaknesses that keep us from fulfilling our dream. Most of you may know my story, but I want to go deeper in that story today. I want to talk to you about some of those perceived weaknesses that I had in my own life growing up and how God allowed me to overcome those. And so I want you to be able to overcome any kind of, weaknesses that you perceive are in your life right now. So let's begin by just let me share with you my history. I was born in the South, and my dad was a toy store owner. And it was great growing up having a dad who owned a toy store. I had 4 sisters, and we went to church every week. But I would say that our Christianity wasn't really relationship-based, and it was more of a tradition, if you will. But my folks were good. My dad was a solid man. He was a good provider for our home. And so I really grew up in a very positive environment. And I love sports. I played sports from, early in my life. My dad started me playing golf when I was 11 years old. And I quickly picked up the game quite well. In fact, by the time I was 14, I had won several golf tournaments and won the junior tournament in my club. And I had 3 hole-in-ones, and I had broken 70 many, many times. And so, most in the community were predicting big things for this young golfer. And I would continue on in that, and ultimately would end up going to school on a golf scholarship. But we did have a major interruption along the way, and that was when I was 14 years old, and I was sitting there watching I Dream of Jeannie. Every young adolescent loved watching that program. And so I was watching it, then a newscast comes on and says 3 prominent businessmen in the community have just been killed in an airplane crash, and my dad was the pilot of that plane. And so this really changed our lives dramatically. In fact, his insurance was all tied up in the company, and it did not pay off. And so here my mom with 5 kids has never been in the workforce all those years and is now forced with having to consider going back to work, and she did. But through that experience, my mom really came to know Christ in a very deep and personal way that was a very vibrant relationship with God, and she began sharing that with her kids. But I was at a stage where I didn't really want to hear about it. I had one goal in mind. I wanted to play professional golf. And so I went to school and a golf scholarship at the university there in my city, and finished without a degree because I was so passionate about the golf, and nothing else really mattered to me. And that was one of my big mistakes in life that I regret. But my mom continued to preach at me, and I didn't really want to hear it. So I moved away to North Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And when I was there was a pastor who used to be was friends with our family growing up. He was at the church where I grew up at. And now he was in North Myrtle Beach, and he was actually at a church across the street from the golf course I was working. And so, I was really striving to be able to get on the tour. It was 1975, and there was a major recession in the country, and I couldn't raise money to get on the tour. And so I was kind of nominal. I was kind of on borderline. I had the ability, but I didn't have the understanding and the mind to be a competitive golfer, and I'll explain why that was a little later. And so that was one of the perceived obstacles I had to be able to fulfill my dream. I didn't have money. And so, how would I get that? And so, over the next several years, I would seek to try to raise money and gamble on the golf course and so forth. But along the way, Christ came into my life as a result of kind of coming to the end of myself. And that is what led me to Christ. And that pastor played a key role. His name was Jim Messick. And I'll never forget his involvement. He's still involved in my life today at 84 years old. And we are very close friends. He is like a father to me. And he's known me since I was 13 years old. And so that was a new chapter in my life. And so I went to Vail, Colorado. And turns out I was a golf pro in Vail, Colorado. But along the way, I realized that that probably was not going to be something I was able to achieve. And so here I had a change in vocation, a direction. And, you know, a lot of our dreams, we can't fulfill them, you know, and there's a part two to our dream, and that we need to adjust our dream based on our ability. You know, I may have had the ability, but I didn't know how to get to another level with that ability in order to achieve my dream. And so, you know, sometimes we can make the adjustments, we can invest in education, we can invest in our lives in order to be a person that can fulfill the dream that we want to have. But sometimes God changes that dream, and sometimes He changes the direction in our life. And we see that in the Bible all the time, where someone is going one direction and God changes the direction of their life. Consider Joseph. He had a big vision. He had a dream of what God was going to do with him. And something got interrupted. The devil tried to kill him through his brothers. But the dream would actually be fulfilled, but there was a detour. And so often life has a detour. The question is, what are you going to do with that detour? Are you going to learn from the detour, or are you going to allow God to use that detour to make you better? And so life went on for several years. I would end up getting married. I would go to Bible school thinking I was called to be a pastor. I was so passionate about Christ at that time. And I ended up working at a church for a few months, only to realize that wasn't where I was called. And but I did get married, and we had some major challenges in our marriage, but we stuck it out for 14 years. But then one day, in 1994, my wife came in one day and said, I don't want to go back to counseling. And we'd been in counseling for several years. And so this was another crisis moment. And she did separate, and a few other things just happened to take place over the next 3 months. I had been a very successful businessman in advertising. I had my own ad agency in Atlanta, and God was blessing that. It was called the Aslan Group, and we worked with clients like American Express and Steinway Pianos and Thomas Nelson Publishers, and you know, God was using us, and I was leading Bible studies, and I was teaching, and I was ministering to others and giving money to Christian causes. And so, you know, life was pretty good except for my marriage. But then one day I got a phone call from my financial advisor, and he says, the $500,000 you have is gone. I had been the victim of a Bernie Madoff type of scam, that I was getting reports every month of our investments, but those reports evidently had been fake reports. And so there was no way I could know that what was going on, because I had somebody in between us that was checking those things. And so it was a devastating situation. And then in the next few days, I would hear that my second largest account, actually my largest account, was a company that we served for almost 5 years and built them from $20 million to $30 million. So we were very good at what we did. But we had a conflict over a particular project, and it was a $140,000 project. And so my client says, we are not going to pay for that project, and we're also releasing you as our ad agency. Well, that was a $140,000 project, of which I had $40,000 of inventory of vendor costs related to that project. And that was devastating. And so then my vice president left me and he took my second largest account. So life went from one place to a whole nother place. Now it's at that point you got to wonder, okay, where are you, God? I've been faithful to you to stick it out in these tough places, but where are you? And so over the next 2 years, I would operate the best I could, kind of navigating this difficult season of life. And so 2 years into that, I met Gunnar Olson, the founder of the International Christian Chamber of Commerce. And it was strange how I met him. I'd been sent an audio tape by him that said God was raising up Josephs all over the world today. And it's often signified by them going through extraordinary adversity in their business and personal life. Well, that was all I heard on that tape. And so I said I need to meet this man. Turns out he was from Sweden, but he was going to be in the United States in a few weeks in Washington, D.C. He listened to, I went up there and hoping to meet him, and he was gracious enough to allow me to meet him. And so when I shared my story with him, he says, "Oh, you have a Joseph calling on your life," and it's signified by people who go through extraordinary adversity to be a physical and provider for others. It's a marketplace call. And so he says, he pulls out a napkin and draws, this one thing. He says, here's where you are now, and here's the next phase of the journey, and here's the next phase. And so it was an incredible Kairos moment for me, because I'd walked into that room that day feeling like a complete failure. And I walked out with an understanding that there was an actual call. You see, Joseph didn't go through his adversity because of failure of something. He went through adversity because of a consequence of the call. And that's what I want you to understand today, that there's 4 reasons we'll could go through adversity, and one of those is a consequence of the call. And so I would start a whole new journey. And during those next 7 years, God would begin to deposit things. I would seek him with all my heart, as Gunnar encouraged me to do. And so this went on for several years, but I was trying to make ends meet. Now, one of the challenges during that time was, how do I pay my bills? Things were really rough, and I was having to pay debts. And so my ad agency really couldn't support what I was doing. But, God often provides manna in strange ways. And one of the things that happened as I was beginning to teach and share what I was learning, this was the beginning of the birth of our ministry. And I would begin to write emails and send them out to friends. And that would become TGIL. I would also start teaching workshops about the Joseph calling, and that our work is a ministry. And so I was realizing that many of us in the marketplace check our faith at the door on Monday. We act like Monday morning atheists rather than kingdom business leaders. And so I began to really invest in the scriptures and understand how I had gotten to where I was, and how do I get out of it? How do I navigate myself out of this? And so it wasn't easy to do. Well, my manna was that I got a consulting job that allowed me to pay my bills and allowed me to sustain myself. And then I had another ministry that hired me to allow me to serve them during this birthing process. And that's one of the things that we all need to understand, is what is the way God might want to provide for us when we get into a tough place. We find an Old Testament principle of what's in your hand with Elijah and the widow who went around and sold lamps to be able to provide for herself. And that is a great case study on what happens when we don't have money. And money can be a perceived obstacle. And I say perceived because it doesn't have to be. And maybe you're in a lean time, maybe you're not. But that can be one of those beliefs that we adopt that keeps us from fulfilling our purpose and destiny. Sometimes you have to invest in things where you least can afford it in order to get your breakthrough. I'm in the middle of that right now, where I'm investing in something that I really can't afford it that well, but I know it's key to a breakthrough. And so if you keep yourself from investing in something that's going to help you, that can be a hindrance to your breakthrough. So, that's where we have to apply faith to believing that God is behind the decision that we want to make. And so that's just one example. And so I continued on in this process, and I began teaching and I began writing. And here's another situation. I perceived myself to be a very poor student. I just didn't have a good grasp of grammar. And so when I started writing, I had this perceived idea that I couldn't be a good writer because I had poor training. And so, but I had a passion to share. And so I decided to go ahead and write. And it's an interesting story. I started writing the TGIF devotionals, and I would get people writing me back saying, I love your devotionals, but have you ever thought about having someone look at your work grammatically? And I said, well, I don't have anybody right now that can do that, but thank you for bringing that to my attention. I know there's a weakness there. Well, this happened about 3 or 4 times again. And then finally, the last person who asked me that, I said, how about you? Could you help me? Well, he turned out to be an English teacher living in Hong Kong. And he agreed to be my long distance editor. So I would write the devotional, send it to him, and then he would send it back and I would publish it. Well, as time went on, I would learn for myself how to be a better writer and to apply it. And so the key point you want to remember there is don't let the obstacle keep you from taking the next step in your journey. I could have said, oh, well, I'm just not good at that, and so I'm not going to do it. Well, today, TGIF is read in 104 countries, and I've written 2 versions of it, and I've actually written 3 total 365 devotionals. And so, God turned my weakness into a strength, but I had to go through a process of, having a little shame in my life from others. The other thing that was surfacing in my life is that people were inviting me to speak. And it used to terrify me to stand up in a group of people. I get so nervous that I began shaking, and I just didn't like it. And so this was another area that God had to change if I was going to enter into my dream of being successful. And so people invited me to come and share with them and teach. Well, I realized one time that the key thing was, is it more important to share the passion of what I have inside, or is it more important for me to be comfortable? And so I had to overcome that obstacle. And so what I did is I become very forceful in my teaching. I would raise my voice to overcome the nervousness and just be intentional about my messaging. And over time, I've become a good speaker. I'm not a high energy kind of guy, but I'm a good communicator on stage. And so now that's become one of my real strengths. I often get compliments on, my talks. And so here again was a perceived weakness. So, I want to challenge you. If you think you have some perceived weaknesses that you just hadn't been able to get past, press in. Step into it, learn from those perceived weaknesses so they don't have to determine your future. And, God has now allowed me to write 19 books, and He has allowed me to minister to men and women in 26 countries. And so God turned my Valley of Achor into a door of hope. Now, for the last few months, I've been sharing about a new program that we've been working on. And, we did a questionnaire on our website and asked you a question. And the question was, what is the biggest obstacle that prevents you from being a Christian leader in the workplace? Many of you gave us some great answers. And we took those answers and we've been compiling those answers and learning from what you said to form a new program that we're about to launch on February the 13th. And it's an exciting program, and it takes all the 30 years of my business and ministry experience and put it into a program designed to mentor and train you. And it's going to be an exciting time, I'm telling you. We've had something called the Change Agent Network that's designed to equip leaders, but this is putting a booster on it. It's adding some dimensions to it that's going to be awesome. I hope these thoughts were helpful to you. There are always obstacles in our path to fulfill our destiny, but those obstacles don't have to keep us from fulfilling that destiny. They can actually be stepping stones for you and I to fulfill that destiny. And I wouldn't have learned some very important things had I not gone through those obstacles. And so think about what those obstacles are and think about how you can walk through them and use them as steps in your journey. Now, at the end of those 7 years, an interesting thing happened to me. I had a piece of property that God had allowed me to hold on to, and I was able to sell that property and become debt-free. I was able to pay off all my debts, and it was 7 years to the month, just like Joseph had his 7 years. Well, I had those 7 years, and at the end of them, God restored me in the financial area, and I was completely debt-free, paid off all my debts. Years later, I would remarry, and I would marry Pamela, and we have a very wonderful marriage today, and she has a prison ministry herself that's a powerful story, and she has a testimony that's incredible. You can find her on lifechangerslegacy.org if you want to hear an inspiring story. And so God has restored and continued to use me in the lives of men and women. And I hope that's an encouragement to you to realize that no matter where you are in your journey, God can use whatever you've gone through, whatever you're into today, to really fulfill your destiny. So I hope that you'll be on the lookout for our new initiative. So hope you'll join us, and love to hear from you. God bless. Just a reminder, put your comment down below, and if you're not part of our group on YouTube, please join and become part of our community there. If you're listening on iTunes, please give us a rating so that others will find us. It's so important that you do that in order for more people to be ministered to by what we share every week. God bless. Have a great day. Take care.
Are you a biblical worker? Do you know what the Bible says about how to work biblically? I've got a great resource I want to give you called Are You a Biblical Worker? It's a 50-question true-false self-assessment, great for personal study and small groups. Plus, you get the answers with supporting scriptures to help you apply what the Bible says about your daily work life. It's a value of $25, but we want to make it available to you as a free ebook. Just go to www.freebiblicalworker.com. That's freebiblicalworker.com.